that miss anything, then they'll be able to catch it in the recording. So thanks everybody for joining. We're going to be talking about mastering interviews. So we're going to do this in a couple of different parts. We're going to talk about answering common interview questions, and then we'll talk about the virtual interview platform and what are some things that you need to keep in mind. And I'm going to try to practice all the things that you're supposed to do in virtual interviewing, which of course is to have the camera at the right angle, have the lighting correct, the background correct, and then to look into the camera. But I do need to read the slides too, so it's a good lesson. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, my name is Shannon Blatt. I'm the Director of Career Services. Also joining me is Christina Wynn, the Senior Career Services Advisor, and Gabby O'Neill, Associate Director. And we have all been with the University of Dallas for some time. Let's see, I've been with UD for 6 years, Christina 5 years, plus her time as a student worker, and Gabby for 7 years. So we have done interview practice with countless students. We've worked with lots of recruiters who have given us these tips and tricks, and so we hope they'll help you out. Okay, what we're going to cover today, tips for acing an interview. So answering the most common questions, which are some that there's some questions that are going to be asked in just about every interview. We'll talk about behavior-based questions. We'll talk about the STAR method for answering behavior-based questions. And then I'll give you some samples of some questions and answers. And then we'll also talk about questions that you should ask the interviewer. And then we'll talk about some of the virtual interview specifics. Okay. So this is my #1 tip. And just before we kind of get started on everything, I want you guys to know I'm really passionate about this subject, so I have a lot to say about it. I have a lot more to say than what's on the slides. So if I start getting carried away, then I'll try to stop myself. But I really think that preparation and really stopping to think about the purpose of an interview can help you determine how to answer the questions. So the interviewer wants to get to know you as a person. I think a lot of people go into an interview thinking that someone is going to try to catch them, or that someone is going to try to dig deep and get them to reveal something about themselves they hadn't planned to, or something like that. And that's one reason why people have such nerves, is you feel like you're really putting yourself on display. But what the interviewer is really trying to do is get to know what you're like as a person, how you interact with other people, and whether or not you'll be a good fit for their team. And especially in a virtual setting, they're trying to figure out how you handle the tech, how you handle Zoom calls, and would you be able to work as part of their remote team. So really thinking about that and thinking about the questions that they're asking you and what they're trying to get at in those questions can really help you decide how to address them. So just as kind of something to lay out about virtual interviews, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail at the end, but be sure if you're participating in a virtual interview, or even, lately we've been seeing, like, for instance, the job fair that we just had, the Handshake job fair. There's a lot of companies that are having virtual career fairs or virtual meet and greets, things like that. Treat those like interviews as well. And prepare just like you would as if it was an in-person interview, because you'll still be having to answer questions and talk about the company, talk about yourself, things like that. So definitely be just as well prepared for a virtual interview as you would for an in-person interview. The interviewer is still looking for someone they can work with, especially remotely, and who's knowledgeable about the role. So, one of the things that virtual interviews have done is created a larger pool for companies to recruit from. So if they're willing to hire you as a remote worker, or if they're expanding their talent pool, then they may be interviewing you from a completely different city. And so it means they're going to be doing probably more interviews for individual positions. So make sure that you're knowledgeable and you can express yourself to the interviewer in a way that shows that you know about the job. Okay, let's get into the questions. The 2 most common interview questions. Tell me about yourself and why do you want to work for this company? Our experience has been that 99% of interviews start with tell me about yourself. And it's kind of almost an icebreaker. You know, they might walk in and say, oh, you know, did the tech work okay? How's everything? You know, what's the weather like where you're living? You know, things like that. But then they're going to launch into, okay, tell me about yourself. A variation of this is walk me through your resume. But usually they just kind of start out with tell me about yourself. And it's a way for you to kind of set the stage for the rest of the interview. And why do you want to work for this company is extremely, extremely important. It's probably the most important question that they'll ask you. So let's talk about how to answer these two questions in particular. Now, these next slides have a lot of text on them, so I'm going to try to add some context to them, but I just want to give you some examples of what to say and what to avoid. Okay, so with tell me about yourself, you know, people take it with different, people take different approaches to this, but what we found to be the most successful is for you to give just a little bit of personal information, nothing sensitive, but then always tie your answer back to why you're the best person for the job. And when I say personal information, it's, you want to say something that makes you stand out a little bit, but you don't want to go so far off in left field that you've totally lost the thread of the fact that you're in a job interview for a particular position. So here's what I'm talking about with that. So here's some things that you should say: your class year, your major, why you're interested in that major, that field, and why you applied for the job. So, and then again, you'll see that you can take that answer and tie it back to why you're the best person for the job. I'm a senior English major with a concentration in business at the University of Dallas. I did a social media marketing internship last summer, and I do all the digital media for a campus club. So I'm really interested in how online content can be used to build brands. So you'll notice that I said, I'm a senior English major, concentration in business, okay? Then I talked a little bit about some of what my experience has been, and then I tie it back into why I am going to be a good person for the job, or why I'm interested in the position. Things you shouldn't say: don't talk about your marital or family situation or anything too personal about yourself. Like, I'm getting married in June and this job really interests me because it's in San Antonio where my fiance lives. You know, that's too personal. Even, you know, sometimes we'll hear our students say, you know, I'm from a big family and I'm the oldest, and, you know, things like that. You know, that is something that tells them about you personally, but it doesn't put you in the context of the job. If you look back to the answer that I gave, that I'm a senior English major with a concentration in business, you know, those are personal things about me, but they're in context with the job itself, okay? And the social media internship, that is in the context of the job itself. You know, if you wanted to get interesting, you could say something in here like, I'm a senior English major with concentration in business, University of Dallas. I love to play ultimate frisbee. I'm in the ultimate frisbee club. I did a social media marketing internship. You know, you have a little nugget there that is an interesting fact about you, but you don't spend a lot of time, you know, going off on a tangent that doesn't put you in the context of the job. So the other thing that another reason that tell me about yourself is so important is because what you tell them is explain to them what you think is important. So if you spend all your time talking about, you know, my favorite show is the Great British Baking Show, and I love to exercise, those are important, you know, but you're telling them these are the things that I find most important. But what you really want to do is show that your interest in the job is what you find most important right now. It's for that moment. So, okay. All right. So let's move on to how to answer why you want to work for ABC Company. There's a couple of reasons why this is so important. And one reason is because, as you guys know, if you've applied for jobs or internships, you can go to LinkedIn, you can go to Handshake, especially Handshake, and you can just start looking at all the jobs and say, click, apply, click, apply, click, apply. But you have to realize that for a company to take a chance on you and hire you, they're going to be spending lots of money to train you and to onboard you. And nowadays, if you're working remotely, they're going to be sending you equipment, all of this stuff. So they're going to make a cash outlay in order to get you on board. So they need to make sure that you understand the position, you understand what you're getting into, and that your values align with their values. So the best way to answer this question is to have done a good deal of research. And I'm old enough to remember the days when if you went to the internet and found a company's mission statement, you were golden. You know, those days are over. You have to do some serious discovery on the particular company to try to find out what resonates with them, what's important to them. And you really need to go beyond just, you know, what you see on the first page and of the website. You need to look at their social media articles, or you need to look at their social media. You need to look at news articles. You can do a Google search. You can check LinkedIn, look for their company page, see what kinds of things they're posting. If it's, for instance, let's say it's cybersecurity, you know, look in trade publications and see what you can find out about that company, and understand the company's values so that you can be prepared to relate how they align to your values. I have a great story of a young lady who applied to work for Accenture, and she had to do a case interview, and she didn't have a lot of business background, and she didn't really do very well on the case interview. But when the time came for them to say, why do you want to work at Accenture? She had 5 reasons that she was able to just bam, 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 and to show my values align with this company's values. And by doing that, she knocked it out of the park and she got the job because they were willing to take a chance on her because she was passionate about the company. So what this looks like in practice is to be prepared to say, you know, why do we want to work for ABC Company? Well, I've done a lot of research on your company, and I see that, you know, you might say something like you value the work that your team does in the community. I noticed that you have, I noticed on your webpage that I saw, or maybe even social media, I noticed on your social media that you have community volunteer days, and that's really important to me because I believe it's important to be, to work for a company that sees itself as part of the community. Or I see that your company values diversity, and that's also very important to me. I look forward to working in a company with a lot of different voices and opinions that can come together to make the world a better place. You know, you'll have to do your own research to figure out what those things are, but by really doing the research well and showing how that resonates with you, and not just rattling it off, not just saying, well, you're a Fortune 500 company, you had, you know, a 20% increase in revenue last year, you know, not just rattling off facts, show what that means to you, and really think about it. And to be 100% honest, if you can't answer this question honestly, then maybe the interview isn't really a great idea if you can't feel passionate about the company.
Right. And I just wanted to add, this is Christina, is that when you do your research, it's easier for you when you have questions that kind of stump you. I will say that I've had a student or an employer tell me this, is that she said that she was in an interview and, you know, she said, well, why do you want to work for the company? And the guy said, oh, well, you know, your stock's doing really well. Like, I even trade some of your public stock. And she goes, really? You trade our public stock? We're a privately owned company and we don't trade publicly. So things like that, it's basically, instead of kind of lying, you just want to be sure that like you're giving an answer of what is truth, instead of just like trying to play it off as if like you know a lot. Especially, I mean, know if it's a private or public company.
Yeah, that's a
number
good nugget
one
of information. And I've actually heard of like consumer products companies or something asking people, so what did you think of our last social media campaign? Or what did you think of our last Twitter campaign? You know, things like that. And the more context that you can provide to a question like this, and the more kind of passion that you show for your answer and for how you really do want to work for this company. And that may seem like a bit hard, especially if you're applying to a lot of jobs and a random one comes up and you're like, I don't know what to say about this mid-level accounting firm, you know? And so, you know, this mid-size accounting firm. So, you know, you have to really do a lot of research and be prepared for this, for it to work. But it's possible. Okay, so behavior-based questions, you guys have probably heard of them before. They're the tell me about a time. Tell me about a time that you worked on a team. Tell me about a time you failed. Tell me about a time that you disagreed with your teammates. How did you handle it? And so what they're trying to get at with these questions, and again, think about these questions in terms of what are they trying to get at by asking you this question. They're trying to assess how you would behave in certain situations and how you handle different types of interactions. And by really, practicing your answers, you don't want to come across that you memorized your answers, but at the same time, you want them to flow from you naturally. Then we recommend something called the STAR method. Now, before I get into that, one thing I do want to mention is you have to know your resume inside and out. And for especially every job or every internship that's on your resume, you need to be able to tell a story, okay? And if you have academic projects on your resume, then you need to be able to tell a story about that. You need to have a couple of different situations that you can pull from different parts of your resume. So if you did an internship at an accounting firm, then, okay, so I can use my accounting firm experience to answer the teamwork question and to answer the difficult coworker question and to answer the multitasking question. Okay, and I can use my time as a server to answer the multitasking question, to answer the difficult customer question, just kind of know which of your stories go for which questions, because you don't know exactly what they're going to ask you. So that way, if you know your stories back and forth, you'll know what to be able to reference. Okay, so here's the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. And the way this works is it sounds like, how am I going to remember all this when I'm trying to answer a question on the fly? But if you practice it enough, then you'll get kind of the flow of it. So let's say that, so there's going to be a slide. The next slide is we're going to talk about how to answer it specifically, but it's, can you tell me about a time when you had to juggle multiple priorities? So you're going to start out with a situation, say, oh, actually that reminds me of a time, blah, 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 set up the situation. And then describe the task that you were given or what was kind of required by the situation. So that's task. And then describe the actions you took and then the results. And I have a little bonus that I like to add to this, and that's describe what you learned from the situation. And I do think this is important because it can really kind of take you to the next level if you're able to show the interviewer that you're self-aware, because that's one of the things that they're looking for when they're talking to you. Mature employees are self-aware. They're aware of their strengths and their weaknesses, and they're doing everything they can to try to learn more and be part of the team. So I'll show you how that looks in the next one. Again, a lot of text, but I just kind of want to go through with this so that you can see how we broke this down. Can you tell me about a time when you had to juggle multiple priorities? During my senior year, I was president of a student club. I was working on my thesis and I was working in the admissions office part-time. I had so much on my plate, I started to get overwhelmed. So I realized that I would need to be really organized and ask for help or I'd get burned out. So I started keeping a detailed calendar and task list that allowed me to see everything that was coming due for the week so I'd be prepared. And I started delegating some of the club tasks to other officers. I realized that it would help me and give them practice for next year after I've graduated. And both of these things helped me stay on top of my commitments and maintain my grades for the semester. And I made the dean's list. And I learned that you have to address stressful issues before they get out of hand. And I learned it's okay to ask for help. So, the bonus just ties it up in a bow at the end, okay? It brings it all back around to, really what makes you a great candidate for the position. So you'll notice what I did here. I went into describing a situation that maybe didn't start out positive, but that I actually took action and got the desired results. So those are really the best stories that you can try to find when you're answering these questions, are the ones that really showcase your ability to handle a situation in a positive way. On this one in particular, it would have been really easy to answer. Yeah, so last semester was just really rough and I had to do my thesis and I was in a club and it was just so much work. And so, yeah, that was a time I had to juggle multiple priorities. So that does not give the interviewer any context about how you handle that. It doesn't give them any kind of view into what you might be like as an employee. And think back to what I said a few minutes ago. What is an employer trying to get at by asking you this question? Do they really care about your thesis and your club experience? No, they don't. They care that you have a plan for when you're in this job and everybody has given you an assignment and everybody's given you a task and you've got all these deadlines. Are you going to melt down? Or do you, have you taken some time to think about, how can I prioritize and what can I do to move forward even with shifting priorities? So, so that's the STAR situation. Again, it sounds a little awkward when you think about having to go through these 4 steps plus the bonus, but if you actually take some time to practice it, then it comes more naturally. So that's just one. There are so many behavior-based questions. If it's something that you're a little concerned about, what would that be like? Then there are countless websites with countless examples of behavior-based questions that you can look up and practice a few of them. Write down the STAR method for 3 or 4 of them before an interview, to make yourself feel more prepared. Here's some other common ones. These are really very common. Tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult coworker or team member. This one is interesting because you need to pick a story for this one that has a happy ending. If you can, obviously you want to be honest when you're giving all of your answers. Always, 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 always be honest, and don't try to make up a situation that didn't really happen. Because they may very well drill down and say, tell me more about that situation. But the difficult coworker one is interesting because if you go in by saying, by throwing people under the bus and things like that, then it's not going to come across well. And I can think of an example when I was doing a mock interview with a student who was a baseball player. And he told me, okay, so we had a guy on our baseball team that was not pulling his weight. He wasn't coming to practice. He wasn't doing conditioning and things like that. And so we sat him down, we had a discussion with him, and then he still wasn't showing up, so we cut him from the team. So that's not an ideal, kind of story that you want to tell for something like that. Again, I said don't lie, so definitely don't make up something that didn't actually happen, but that would have been a better story if he could have said, so we learned that he was having trouble in some of his classes. And so we found the number for student success, and we connected him, or we connected him with student success, and he was able to get tutoring, and that helped him a ton. Or we got some people together to tutor him and help him write papers, or, just something like that, where you can show that you were able to resolve the issue with that difficult coworker or team member. Tell me about a time, and again, let me back up really quick and also tie it up with a bow and say what you learned about that. So we learned that we can't always know what's going on with other people. But if we ask questions and show empathy, then we can make a successful situation for everybody. Tell me about a time when you worked on a team. What was your role and what were the results? This is another one that's it's pretty straightforward. Just try to think of stories that if they don't end positively, that you can say what you learned from them. Tell me about a time when you were given a task and no direction. Again, try to think about what is an interviewer trying to get at with something like this. What are they trying to find out by asking you this question? Are you going to be able to handle it if we put you out there without a bunch of details? What are you going to do? Are you going to freeze, or are you going to just, dive right in? So again, be really familiar with your resume and kind of know your stories ahead of time, and that'll help you answer the behavior-based questions. Okay, so here are some other questions that are not behavior-based, but come up a lot. What accomplishments are you most proud of and why? What's your greatest strength, weakness? And can you tell me about a time you failed? Now, tell me about a time you failed is, again, you can handle it exactly the way of the STAR method. You just talk about the time if you want to say, I was taking a class, I was so far over my head, I had no idea what I was doing, and it was this miserable failure. But you know what I'm going to say here? What's the most important thing is, what did you learn from that situation? So if you just go in and say, I took a class and I made a D and I failed it and it was the absolute worst. So what I learned from that situation was that I have to ask for help when I need it, or that, I can't get in too deep with work and school without, trying to have some way of going to tutoring, or I don't, whatever the case, you just have to tie it back to what you learned. I want to mention something about what accomplishments are you most proud of and why, and then we'll move on to what's your greatest weakness, because that's one of the hardest questions in interviews to answer. What accomplishments are you most proud of and why is really interesting. And I know I have a lot of examples here, but I was mock interviewing someone, and she started telling me a story about how she backpacked through Europe. And I was kind of thinking, you know, she's trying to apply for a financial analyst position. Is this really the direction she wants to go? But then she said, I've always, you know, had a lot of fear of traveling by myself. And I knew that this was something that was really important that I needed to do for myself. So I planned the entire trip, and you know, I had courage and perseverance, and I went through, and it was the greatest trip of my life. And after she said that, I love that story so much because it was something about her. And as you can tell, I wouldn't be telling you the story if I had ever forgotten it. It just really stuck with me because, you know, my first inclination was, are you going to say, oh, getting my master's degree was my greatest accomplishment? That's fine. If that is your greatest accomplishment, talk about it. Talk about why you're proud of it. Talk about what it means to you in your life and in the context of your life. But don't be afraid on this one to get just maybe a little bit more personal, because this is something that's very personal. If you want to say something about, you know, having my kids or something like that, that's fine, but make sure you give it some context. You know, if you say working on my master's degree has been my greatest accomplishment because I have a family and it's been a lot of sacrifice for me, and I've really put a lot of effort into it, and I'm very proud of what I've been able to do and the grades I've been able to make, things like that. Just be prepared to give it some context. So you can go a little more personal with this. Be careful. Don't share information that might cause some sort of explicit or implicit bias if you can avoid it, but you can talk about some personal things in this accomplishment section if you want to. Okay, what's your greatest weakness? This is a tough one. So and again, I mentioned earlier that I was old enough to remember something from early internet days. I had an Interviewing for Dummies book back in the 90s, and it specifically said that your greatest weakness should be a veiled strength. And let me tell you, that is the worst advice you could ever give anybody. It's completely dated and it's not a thing anymore. And so make sure that you, if you've ever heard that before, that you completely unlearn it. So the worst thing you can say is I don't have any weaknesses, or if it's a failure question, or that I never failed. And don't try to say, oh, you know, I work too hard, or I care too much, or, you know, something like that, because that's not genuine. So again, I know this is something I keep saying over and over, but what is an employer, a hiring manager, or recruiter trying to get at with this question? What are they trying to uncover? And really with this one, they're trying to see if you're self-aware, and they're trying to see if you can acknowledge that you have areas that you need to work on and that you have a plan in place to address them. So that's the most important part of this question, is the plan that you have in place to address it. So here's an example. I found that when I have a lot of things to do at once, I get really overwhelmed and I just freeze up and I don't know where to start. So I'm addressing that by breaking every new project into smaller, more manageable steps so that it's not so daunting to look at a whole project at once. So the first rule is don't say I don't have any weaknesses, or don't turn it in, try to turn a strength into a weakness, but then also make sure that you have the plan in place. There are some things that you should never say, and they are, I'm always late. I hate working with people. And just don't even try to approach that one. Don't say I'm always late. Don't say I hate working with people. And don't say I get really angry sometimes. So those are like the three main things that would be super red flags. But if well, and you know, I say, don't say I'm always late. If you really had a great plan to address that, then that would be iffy. But you know, you're better off looking at yourself in a realistic light and thinking, what are some areas? For me, it would be I talk too much, which, you know, heaven forbid that you guys would even believe that. But, you know, that's kind of where you want to go with this. What plans do you have in place? So one of the ones that I've seen come up that I think is super effective is if you were to say, I get nervous speaking in front of groups. And so what I've done is I've worked with my classmates in projects that we're presenting. And since I don't like to present, they've given me small roles. And as I've done just a few minutes presenting at a time, I've gained confidence, and I'm working on that and trying to improve. So whatever you do, just talk about what you're doing to improve that. Now, of course, I spent a lot of time on that, but that question is getting less and less and less popular. It is just not something that a lot of recruiters ask. It depends on the company and it depends on their approach to interviewing, but it's a little bit of a gotcha question, and it sort of can make you feel a little bit, it can make the interviewee feel a little bit uneasy, so recruiters aren't doing it as much as they used to.
And they'll rephrase the question. So instead of saying like your greatest weakness, they might go, well, tell me about a time that you failed, or tell me about a time where you had to learn from your mistakes, or tell me about when you made a mistake. So they're basically being a little bit more innovative on how to approach that question, just because they know that people will try to say something like, I don't have any weaknesses, or you don't want to admit that you have weaknesses.
And weakness just isn't a good word. I mean, it's just not something that has a positive connotation. And, you know, in a lot of these cases with the recruiters, they're trying to sell you on their company too. So it feels like a little bit of a gotcha. So we're just not seeing it as much. We're seeing, tell me about a time you failed, a lot more. And I'm not going to go in great detail on this because we have some other things to look at. But this is, you know, the approach is exactly the same as your greatest weakness. Be honest, tell the truth, don't throw people under the bus or anything like that, but talk about what you learned from the situation. You know, this one I just talk about how nobody wanted to take charge of the project, and so we got a bad grade because no one was pulling their weight. And what I learned is that if we don't take charge early on, then it's going to fail. So we have other things to cover, so I'm going to move on from that. But any of these, if you guys want to practice any questions, I would recommend that you you can Google behavior-based questions, or any one of us would be happy to mock interview if you ever want some real live practice. Okay, expect the unexpected. So you guys have heard about interview questions like these. It depends on the company. And again, here's another story of me mock interviewing a student. We prepped and we prepped and we prepped, and I felt really good about her answers, and I was really excited for her to get to the interview. And this is no joke. They asked her, if you were an animal, what kind would you be? So this kind of throws out the window my thing that I said a little while ago about what are they trying to get at with this question. So do they really care what kind of pizza you would be, or what kind of animal you would be, or what's in your backpack? Is that something they really care about? What they're really looking for is how you react to that kind of unexpected situation, and can you think on your feet? And so, I mean, I'd probably have to really stop and think. If you ask me an animal, I'd probably be a squirrel, you know, or I don't know, a mockingjay. That's not real, sorry, mockingjay. Anyway, it's okay to go, I need to think about that for a second. Okay, all right, I think I would be a squirrel because I'm active and I jabber a lot, you know, something like that. It's okay to stop and take a second to think. Don't be just completely silent, because then they won't know what's going on. If you were, especially in a video interview, and they asked you that question and you just sat there thinking and they couldn't see your body language, then they might not know how if you heard them even. So what you can say in that situation is, I need some time to think about that one. That's an interesting question. And then, you know, your wheels are going to be turning the whole time. You got to come up with something eventually, but you know, just be prepared to kind of think on your feet and look. You can even look up what are some weird interview questions. And there's one about how many golf balls can fit inside of a school bus, and how many windows are there in New York City. You know, just really weird things that they are trying to see if they can see your thought processes and if you can think on your feet. So always be prepared to answer honestly. What do you think has prepared you to do this job? What's in your backpack right now? Just expect the unexpected, because you never know when a weird question might come up. Okay, so remember how I said that the most important question was, why do you want to work for this company? This is kind of a tie-in with that. Do you have any questions for me? This is extremely important, because again, this part of the interview tells the interviewer that you pictured yourself in this position, and that you've thought about what it would be like to be in this position, and you have real honest questions because you want to learn more. Okay. So the worst thing you can say is nope. And the second worst thing you can say is, how many vacation days do I get? So, those questions come when you get the offer and you start talking to HR and you're evaluating the offer. But as far as asking when the interviewer says, do you have any questions for me? It's best to have about 5 questions ready to go. And the reason why you need to have a few more ready to go is it's very likely that they will have answered at least a couple of them during the interview itself. And so it's always good to have, some spares that you can pull out if they've already specifically talked about that. So 2 to 3 good ones. You don't want to, it's not you grilling them. It's not like a media interview where you're asking a whole bunch of rapid fire questions. You're trying to get a sense of what the job is really like and how to be successful in the job. So here's some examples of some really good questions that you could ask. Can you give me an idea of the types of projects that the financial analyst usually does? Or can you give me an idea of the type of projects that the media intern usually does? What's the usual career track for someone who starts in this position? And again, you see that's showing them that you've thought, okay, so if I take this position, then next I can get promoted to this, and next I can get promoted to this. And, people used to think, oh, they're going to think that I just want to move on. Well, it's not that. It's that you're picturing yourself as part of this company for the long term. So that's a real positive. Can you describe a day in the life of somebody who's a financial analyst? What do you like best for working for ABC Company? And they love that because that'll give them a chance to say, oh, the people, they always say the people are just amazing and the company really cares. And, they'll start talking about themselves. And a great kind of segue for that is you ask something like this and they say, it's a great company. We spend a lot of time in the community. What a great time for you to say, oh, that's so interesting because I'm really involved in my community and I'm really looking to be part of a company that's also involved in the community. You can just give it, again, tied up in a little bow there. So here's another example. I saw on your website that ABC Company has so again, I keep talking about community involvement. ABC Company has employee groups that spend time volunteering. What are some of the community programs you've supported? Oh, we went to schools, we did tutoring, we did Habitat for Humanity. Oh, that's amazing. I did Habitat for Humanity in my hometown. Anything like that you can do, that's true, that you can, again, make a tie-in is great. And that's really a time for you to learn about the company, genuinely learn about the company, and then also to kind of telegraph your interest to them. Okay, so we're going to move on to some stuff about video interviews. If anybody has a question, pop it in the chat, and Gabby and Christina can call out for any of those. I'm happy to stop and answer those right now. But I know I just kind of threw a lot at you guys, but certainly this is information we're going to record if you want to go back and watch it again or look back at the slides and see some examples for answering these questions. Okay, types of video interviews. Now it's interesting because when we first put this workshop together, it was pre-COVID. So this was something where Zoom video interviews were very uncommon. And I'm sure that there are some places around the country and maybe even some places in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that are still doing in-person interviews, but I would imagine they're extremely rare. And, for the foreseeable future, Zoom interviews are going to be what companies are doing. And I think that we've definitely heard some companies say that they miss in-person interviewing. They miss the personal connection with a candidate. They miss that kind of interaction and showing them around the office and things like that. But it also gives them, just like I said before, a much larger candidate pool to pull from. We were talking to Enterprise the other day, and they were saying that they would fly people in for interviews. And now, that's something that they're not able to do. And it makes their turnaround time a lot faster. They're able to get a candidate through the pipeline much quicker because they've accepted that this Zoom format is the way that they're going to have to be doing the recruiting. So let me go back really quick to HireVue. HireVue is a brand name. There are other brand names for this type of interview, but this is a situation where you go to a website, they give you a code, you go to the website and you start, kind of the process, the video, if you will, and they ask you questions. And then you get a second to think about it. You get longer than a second. You get as long as you want to think about your answer. And then you hit record and you record your answer looking into the camera. You can take as long as you want on most of them to think about what you want to say, but you only get one chance. So that's why they give you plenty of time. This is HireVue in particular. Fidelity Investments uses HireVue exclusively, and they've actually told us that they put more emphasis on the HireVue than they do on actual resumes. And the recruiter said at a site visit we had, he said, we could lay all the resumes out on the table and they would all look really similar. But when we get someone on the HireVue and we can see them and see their interactions, then we really have a better sense of what they would be like on the team and whether they would be a good fit. So again, the hardest part of this is you don't get a chance to go back and re-record. So you have to be prepared with your answers. Zoom, we obviously all know what Zoom is. So, the things that you need to know are just general Zoom etiquette. And if we were teaching this pre-COVID, we would have to really go into great detail about virtual space etiquette. And I think you guys probably know a lot of that now. But of course, lighting and your background. Don't overthink your background, but don't underthink it too. Definitely look behind you and see if you have, what kind of posters are on the wall behind you, what is showing, right now I've got a Zoom background on. If you were to be able to see my bookshelf, it's carefully curated in case I'm in a situation where I don't have a background. But the main thing that you're looking for is not to show anything that's, number one, offensive, or number two, just messy. You don't want to show a mess in the background. It doesn't have to be something that qualifies for rate my room or whatever the Twitter feed is. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to be at least plain, because the last thing you want is for the person to be looking behind you and looking at what, if that's, an empty ramen bowl or something like that back there. Now, one thing I said was to always look at the camera. And it's funny because I always have told everybody that, look at the camera, look at the camera, look at the camera. And the more Zoom I do, the harder I find it. And so it's a lot harder than you think. And so don't kind of beat yourself up about it, but try to make a habit. So like right now, everybody knows when you're doing a Zoom, you can't stop looking at yourself. No matter how much you are trying not to do that, you still are looking down at the group or whatever, and you end up looking at yourself. Just make sure that you are taking time to look back up into the camera. So just like I'm doing now, I'm looking down, looking at myself now, thinking about my answers, maybe looking off, but then as I'm kind of tying it up, then I'm looking back into the camera and making that connection. So, again, everybody's I'm tired of saying unprecedented and new normal and everything else. We're used to this format now. People are more comfortable with it. I think people are a little more forgiving of it. But just try to make sure that you're taking the time to look into the camera. A couple of other pointers.
Hey, Shannon, I was just going to interrupt you really quick. We've got a question in the chat. So someone asked, when answering experience-based questions or behavior questions, is there a proper balance between relying on school or extracurricular experience and professional work experience?
That's a really, really, really good question. And Gabby and Christina might have some thoughts on this too. I always lean towards your professional experience. So let's take this from an undergraduate perspective. And let's say that you're in a club, you've had an internship or a job, and you've had academic projects that you've worked on. You want to pick your best stories, but you definitely want to have at least a couple of answers to those questions that deal with your professional experience, because then you're showing that you've, had some life outside of your bubble. You've had, and even if it's like, it doesn't have to be an internship. you know, suppose it's a multitasking question and you were a server. I mean, wow, what a great, I'm sure you have a million stories if you were ever a server. So, you know, try to balance it out a little bit and lean on the work experience as much as you can. And when you do academic experience, it's really best to focus on group projects if you can. You know, talking about a paper that you did, unless it's some kind of question about research or how you approach research or something like that, it's probably best not to talk about your academic assignments. But if it's like a group project that you did in one of your business classes, then absolutely, you know, talk about, those are great for teamwork and collaboration and things like that.
Right.
Same thing for clubs.
I agree. I would say that we would always say that you want to lean on towards your professional experience, just because that shows that you have experience with working with others in a professional environment. I will say that if you are either a career changer or maybe you're going into a very different field than when you previously had, you have to depend on academic projects because that's only relevant information. So like if you were in operations beforehand and now you're completely moving over into like finance and accounting, you might have to lean on those accounting projects that you did in order to kind of show them that you have the expertise. But with those, I agree, like I always would focus on team projects where you actually had a defined role, because then you can say what your role was and how you impacted the team. If you were a leader, that's even better, because then you can describe about how you organize them as a leader. And that's always effective in any type of question that you'll ever get.
Okay. Okay, so a couple of virtual interview tips that I want to give you. I was on a call. It was the Wall Street Journal actually sponsored this big career webinar, and they had like 4 or 5 different speakers, and they had the CEO of ZipRecruiter, and I really liked what he talked about when it came to virtual interviews, because, you know, some people, again, you'll hear recruiters or someone else say, oh, we miss the personal touch. But he was saying that Zoom or virtual interviews actually put you, the interviewee, in charge. And the reason why is because you get to set the tone. And if you're walking into an office where there's an interviewer, you're in their domain and they get to set the tone and they kind of run the show. But you're on more equal footing in a Zoom situation. And he said, you know, all the same things about your lighting and your camera angle and stuff like that. But he said, boy, the first thing when they admit you into that room or whatever, that you have a big smile on your face. And he said, he actually had like the exact sentence to say. He said to the, oh, I'm so excited to be here because I really want to learn more about X. You know, the first thing that you do is set that tone and say, oh, okay. Oh, hi, Jim. Hey, I'm so glad to be here. I'm really interested in hearing more about Capital One Bank. I'm really excited. And just boom. And he was saying, you know, be on the edge of your seat and just, you know, even though you can't see your full body language in a Zoom situation, just be leaning in and excited and really show that kind of excitement that this was a great opportunity for you and that you're really setting the tone for that. And boy, just smile, really smile and show how excited you are. And I thought that was just absolutely fantastic advice. Another thing too that he said, and I've heard other people say differently, is, you know, you got to always maintain eye contact and never look away. He was saying that he thought, and I thought, you know, he's got a lot of credibility. He said that one of the most flattering things you can do is write down what people say, that you think enough about what they're saying that you want to remember it, so you're going to write it down. So the only thing, if you do something like that, you need to narrate it. So let's say that I had asked you, what do you find, what's the best thing about working for ABC Company? And if you were to say, okay, so Jim, what do you like working about ABC Company? And if you don't mind, I'm going to take some notes here. So you've narrated that, so you showed that you're taking notes, and that you know, that way you can see you're only seeing the side of my head, so it doesn't look like I'm checking my phone. You know, you're specifically saying, I'm taking notes here. And you've let them know. And again, narrate it. If you need some extra time to answer a question, just tell them what you're doing, because your body language isn't as obvious on Zoom. So I thought those were two really good pieces of information. Of course, we mentioned lighting and camera. You know, you've got to make sure that the camera is not in, you know, this situation. Or of course the word, and I probably messed this up. No. Yeah, I did mess it up. Oh well. Probably the worst situation is when you're looking at a laptop, and I can't make it look like this while I'm doing it, but you guys know the look where you're looking down at your laptop, and that's just, it's not about being flattering. It's just you're hunched over. It's just not a good kind of power pose. So definitely stack your laptop up so that your camera hits you as close to eye level as possible. Try, you know, I've had some calls with some students recently where they were outside because they're in the middle of classes. It's the only private space they could get, you know, or something away from other students. That's okay, but let me tell you, the bells start ringing at certain times of day, and that was something that happened on a couple of calls. Just, you know, plan ahead for these kinds of things, you know, to use headphones. You guys know all that stuff now. We used to have to tell everybody this kind of thing, but it's not so much anymore. Okay, I'm going to move on a little bit, unless Gabby and Christina, you guys, have I forgotten anything on?
I would just add, you know, because Zoom is not the same as being in person, you have to use a lot more body language, as Shannon mentioned. So use your facial expression. And you also kind of have to move a little bit. So, you know, you might notice that's like maybe Christina and I, because we're listening, we're a little static. And sometimes that comes across to the interviewer as you're cut off, or your internet went out or something, because you're just sitting in the same place and not moving or blinking or whatever. So just keep that in mind. You can kind of like nod, or, you know, move over here, lean your head like this, you know, just to show that you're still active and you haven't just like logged off or your internet cut out or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would say too is that, you know, when we have to like record sessions, or if we're like on this, you have to bring your energy level up in order for it to convey engagement. And if you don't do that, then you can sound really flat. So like I listened to a couple of recordings I did, and I sounded very flat. And it was because I was talking as if I was in front of you, and I didn't have to put like this extra effort. But when you're recording, it kind of comes off very differently. So I would say either practice the virtual interview with different people on like a Zoom call and see what works best for you. And also like testing out your mic. You know, you might be a very soft-spoken person, so you have to either have a mic right on you in order to make sure that they can hear you, your enunciation, your dictation, and all of that, or else they won't be able to hear you. It sounds like you're very soft, and I don't know what you're saying next. So those are just types of things I would practice. And I know that it's really hard to make yourself psyched up. So do what you need to, like a regular interview would be. Where you go into that superpower pose, or you have to like bring your confidence up. It's the same thing.
Another thing too to be prepared for is be prepared for your tech. You know, what's your plan if your tech goes out? And again, I know I keep telling personal anecdotes here, but you know, we're working remotely, and my husband is also working remotely. And I discovered the other day that every time he uses the microwave, my Zoom crashes. And so I've lost a couple of calls before I finally realized it was him microwaving his lunch. So, you know, be prepared for, if it drops out, that you either rejoin the Zoom link right away. Don't let it fluster you. They will understand that. Try to test your tech and everything that you can ahead of time, but just know that everybody's in the same boat, and just say a quick explanation. I'm so sorry, my Zoom crashed. I jumped back in. Or, you know, if you can't get back in for some reason, send an email and say, is there any way we could do this by phone? Phone is always a great backup, and I'm sure they would be happy to do that. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to zip really quick through phone screens. Those are still a thing. You know, recruiters often are the first person to talk to you on the phone. It's a quick, easy way for them to just see if you really realized that you applied for that job, and it's a way for them to just kind of get through a couple of basic questions. Always go into somewhere quiet, and we talked about smiling, upping your energy level. You have to do that on a phone screen especially. Don't shuffle papers while you're on a phone screen, because you can hear more detail on the phone from that for some reason. And don't take the call while you're driving. Whatever you do, that's the worst possible thing you could do, because the recruiter won't like it because they'll feel like you're putting yourself in danger, and you would be putting yourself in danger. So this is, I really don't need to say this. You guys know this, but working with a remote team is just the way that things are right now. And how you handle a Zoom situation, and I keep saying Zoom, of course, there's Microsoft Teams, there's, who knows, somebody might even use Skype out there. I don't know, but there's all these other different platforms. You have to be ready to work in that kind of situation. The next slide is everything I've already talked about, nothing new. Oh, this is about dress nicely. Now that's one thing that, you don't necessarily have to have on a suit and tie. If you feel like that makes you feel more, and I'm saying for males, or a business suit for women, or, a really nice dress and a statement necklace and everything for women, you do not have to dress up to the top level for a Zoom interview. But if that makes you feel confident, then 100% absolutely do it. But at the very least, you need to be well-groomed. For men, I would recommend, if it's an interview, that you at least wear a blazer. The days of wearing full coat and tie are not quite what they used to be, but you can never go wrong with looking your absolute best, but you can certainly underdress. And so just think about the company, think about what you know about the company, and make your decision based on that. And smile.
And some extra tips. So what we have found out is that if you wear a dark color, it shows up better on camera. And then also be careful with print. So like you might not be able to see what this print is exactly, but it's something to think about and how prints translate. I would avoid very thick vertical stripes. They just look weird on camera and they'll kind of wave a little bit. Yeah. So that's just a recommendation that we actually got from a couple of different people about how you appear on camera. But yeah, dark colors are usually best. If you can pick solid, that's great.
Okay. Okay. This is all stuff we've just already talked about. Okay, and this is us. So you can email us at career@udallas.edu if you have any questions. We do mock interviews all the time. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be scheduling mock interviews with employers. We've recruited some top level employers and a couple of graduate schools to help students practice in a low stakes setting. Because that's one of the things that we found is if you get to practice with someone who really hires people on a regular basis, then you get a lot more authentic experience. But there's a limited number of slots for those. So if it's a situation where you have an interview coming up and you want to practice, then absolutely the three of us are happy to help you with that. So we do it all the time. Anybody got any questions? Anything in the chat? Anything we want to bring up or ask? Oh my gosh, look at the time. See, we did it. We followed all of our rules. Okay, if nobody has any questions, then please email us. Be sure and look out for our other workshops that we're going to be having soon. Check your emails. We're sending you guys stuff in Handshake. If it doesn't look like it applies to you, then you don't have to open it, but you might want to check it out and see about the other workshops and events that we'll be coming up for the rest of the semester.
Oh,
we had a question.
Oh, yay. I love questions. Okay.
Someone asked, how is the job market?
Okay, that's an interesting question because we're still trying to figure that out too. Obviously, everything fell off a cliff in March and April, and we had a lot of students who lost internships. One thing we didn't have, and of course we're a smaller school, so our scope may be a little bit different, but we didn't have people who had offers have them rescinded, okay? Now, if you look at the pool of students who graduated in May, then the number of students who have a job or who have been accepted to grad school is about the same as what we had by this time the previous year. We usually track students for 6 months after graduation. So at this point, we're at about 92% of all the students that graduated in May. are either going to grad school or have a job. So that doesn't answer your question about the job market. That gives you a little bit of our context about the job market that our typical students are going into. Now, a lot of the job market question depends on the sector. We've seen a big pickup in financial services. You know, that is one area where they just cannot get enough people. And when I say financial services, I'm meaning Fidelity, Schwab, TD Ameritrade, which I know they're going to be the same company eventually, but those kinds of jobs. Other jobs that are business development support, things like that. You know, those are areas where people are still hiring. Of course, you're not seeing people getting hired in hospitality. Healthcare was a little touch and go for a while when hospitals were not able to do profitable things like surgeries and things like elective surgeries. But you know, the anticipation is that you know, that hiring will come back. You know, we had a lot of students kind of ask the question, and this was around the country, not just our students. Should I sit out the job market right now and wait it out until it gets better? And we've talked to a lot of people who were doing what we do during the financial crisis. And what a lot of people have said is, you know, you don't get hired. What is it? You don't get hired for 100% of the jobs you don't apply for, you know, whatever the case is. We wouldn't say that you should necessarily settle, but you need to be realistic about your job prospects. Employment is trending upward. It's not what it was before COVID. But the Dallas-Fort Worth unemployment rate, the last time I saw, I think the Dallas Morning News said the other day it was 6.8%, which compared to pre-COVID when it was 2 point something, that sounds like a big difference. But if you think about some of the worst unemployment that this country has had, then 6.8 is not anything to sneeze at. So the thing is, in a tough job market, you have to be very, very particular about researching the companies you're applying for and being 100% prepared because they will probably have more applicants than what they've had in the past. So you have to do everything you can to be prepared, you know, for the interview. You have to have your resume on point so that they can get to the information they need quickly, and just be really targeted about working your network as well. So hope that answers the question. Any others? Okay. Okay, so I ended up going over with my long-winded answer to that last question, but we really appreciate you guys coming out and or turning on, or whatever you want to say this about our Zoom workshop. So we appreciate that, and please email us. That's what we're here for. We're excited and passionate about what we do, in case you couldn't tell, so we're here to help. Okay? All right, thanks guys.
Thank you guys.
Bye.